I'm Tom Bruulsema, and with the International Plant Nutrition Institute. And what I'd like to speak to you on today is managing plant nutrition to sustain human health. The organization I work for has a mission of developing and promoting scientific information about responsible management of plant nutrition. And we even added on for the benefit of the human family, of course. Our mission is really directed to the people who sell fertilizer products around the world. And our member companies are those who produce plant nutrients of various kinds. And the 15 companies are shown there. We also have affiliate members and work together with other organizations in the fertilizer industry. What will frame my talk today is a publication that we have that has been in the planning stages for about the past year and a half or so, and we're hoping to release this somewhere in the coming year. And it's a book we're titling Fertilizer Use and Human Health. Luc already began with the explanation of how fertilizer use is now, even just nitrogen, is estimated to be responsible for the support of at least half the world's population today. And in terms of the food security part, I think he has done an excellent job of showing fertilizer's role in that sense of supporting human health. But when we looked at this this issue or this topic, we thought to ourselves that what we need is a comprehensive review, because at the same time that fertilizer is recognized as being essential for food production, and it affects human health through many other pathways, many other topics, and so I will structure my talk around that. Our objective is to describe the contribution of fertilizers to achieving food and nutrient security for the health of the growing global population. And our editorial committee this is a joint project between IFA and IPNI, and we include on our editorial committee Ross Welch as well, and Kevin Moran, Ismail Chakmak, so that we have at least a broad representation. Our plan for this publication, I'm going to skim through the reasons for it, but is to address a broad range of topics, and each of them, to the extent possible, what we're asking is scientists and scientific authorities from independent organizations to address each of these in a separate chapter. Food security has already been covered by Luc. Micronutrients, malnutrition, biofortification. I'm entrusting. I haven't seen Ross's presentation yet, but I'm familiar enough with his work that I know that I can leave all those topics, and including selenium, to him. And so what I'm going to try to do is just give you just skim over the remaining chapters in this publication, just to give you an idea of some of the issues that we're trying to address when we go to this publication. Just going to back up for a second to some of the reasons why we're doing this. In fact, I took this slide from my presentation to the group in Savannah yesterday. That was an industry group, and one of the roles of our institute as well is to convince industry that this is the path we ought to be taking. Why are we publishing a review of human health impacts on fertilizer use? We want to raise awareness of the positive impacts of fertilizer use. And in order to do that, our communicators have to be aware of the negatives as well, and we have to base our communications on science. We have to correct misperceptions among the critics of the industry, and of course the only thorough way to do that is with a credible, scientific, evidence-based approach. We also want to invite constructive contributions towards resolving the issues that we do face. And we intend that this kind of a book will be read by a wide audience. Scientists, educators, policymakers, everyone at IFPRI. That's our hope and our intent, that we would really like to have partners like yourselves have that same appreciation for the wide range of issues that affect fertilizer use. So now to get into a few topics one at a time. We have a chapter titled Functional Quality of Fruits and Vegetables, and we're trying to address, okay, what are the impacts of the way we manage the plant nutrition for different crops on what they contain and how it relates to human nutrition and human health. John Jaffon, Jean Lester are the lead authors of this chapter, and they highlight research that has demonstrated that foliar potassium with sulfur could enhance the sweetness, texture, color, vitamin C, beta-carotene, and folic acids of muskmelons. Work on pink grapefruit showed that foliar potassium could increase the lycopene, increase beta-carotene, increase vitamin C concentrations. Studies that have reported positive correlations between potassium nutrition and banana fruit quality parameters, total soluble solids, reducing sugars, and negative correlations with fruit acidity as well. This is an area that's kind of a pet topic of mine myself. About 10 years ago or so, we started some projects in Ontario, Canada, where I'm from. We had, in those years, back in 1998 and 99, I was aware of some research plots that had been put out on some fairly low potassium soils where we had quite a wide incidence of potassium deficiency in soybeans. And we took samples from those plots where we had a range from going from very deficient soybeans to well-fed soybeans in terms of their potassium nutrition. And then what we looked at, one of the compounds that was being widely touted as having benefits as a nutraceutical ingredient was the isoflavones in soybeans. And lo and behold, we did find a positive relationship between the potassium concentration in the seeds and the isoflavone content in the seeds. And to summarize the research, 3 years at 2 different sites, we basically found approximately a 13% increase in the major isoflavone components. And that got published as well. I would have to put out that there's a condition to this. What we demonstrated is that when you go from growth deficient conditions of potassium nutrition to sufficient, you get the increase. Further research that's been done that shows that if you go above optimal levels of potassium, there's no further increase in isoflavones beyond that point. But that's an interesting finding. It's something that's very relevant to human health as well, and we're trying to support more research along those lines as well. We'll have a chapter that will focus on, well, what does fertilizer do for the proteins, the oils, the carbohydrates in major food crops, and the focus there is on cereals. The traditional response of cereals to nitrogen is illustrated in this figure. This is from Dr. Cynthia Grant, who is in Western Canada, and shows that the first thing that nitrogen does for cereals is increase yield. It doesn't have much increase in protein, but the protein starts to increase and has a somewhat higher optimum rate than the optimum rate for yield. And then there are many other effects, not a lot of them very large and dramatic necessarily, and some of them going in both directions. For example, rice, higher nitrogen can give higher glutenin, which can be a good thing because it's a little bit better in terms of limiting amino acids, but also produced higher chalkiness and worse eating and cooking quality. But when the nitrogen was delayed so that it was applied after panicle initiation, it actually improved the milling quality and the protein in rice as well. In corn as well, we've demonstrated that nitrogen can increase protein, which is expected, also test weight, but it decreased oil and extractable starch. In wheat, you can show that the falling number, which is used in the milling industry as an index of how well the wheat flour will contribute to rising quality, that responded to nitrogen as well. Soybeans, we've shown that protein and oil will increase with phosphorus, that we'll tend to get a small increase in oil and a small decrease in protein with higher levels of potassium. And in potatoes, a lot of interesting effects have been found as well in terms of nitrogen increasing the yield in starch and protein, but actually reducing the biological value of the protein, again related to the amino acid balance. That phosphorus and potassium would reduce protein but increase its biological value, and sulfur actually increasing the biological value because the methionine and cysteine would be increased. This is just to illustrate the role of sulfur and its impact on the specific protein quality that relates to the rising quality for bread. Okay, so those are some of the nutritional components I've dealt with. We're also dealing with some of the sensitive issues, nitrate in human nutrition and human health. And this is an area there's been intensive research and a big change in the full understanding of what is nitrate in terms of human health. The traditional thinking since about 1945 to 1980 was that nitrate was associated with blue babies and possible risk of cancer. And a lot of studies were showing those things. But since the early 80s, a lot of discoveries on nitric oxide and how nitrate and nitric oxide are metabolized within the human body shows that nitrate is actually produced within the human body. And nitrate has essential roles. And in fact, you can demonstrate that you actually increase cardiovascular health with higher nitrate intakes in certain conditions. And so this chapter is written by Nathan Bryan and Hans van Grinsven, and it's summarizing the latest research in our understanding of the role of nitrate in the human body. We're dealing as well with things like food safety issues, mineral and organic fertilizers. Rufus Cheney will be authoring the chapter on mineral fertilizers. Mike Goss, who was with the University of Welch, on organic fertilizers, and what we're talking about there is animal manures. We're talking about sewage biosolids and composts as well. We touch on the topic of eutrophication, a very complex and difficult one, because yes, we know fertilizer use worldwide is on a massive scale. We're at the point of 100 million tons a year of fertilizer nitrogen going on to crops, and no doubt we're going to have ecological impacts. Eutrophication basically just means well-nourished. We know it's accelerating due to many causes, including fertilizer use. What we focus on in this chapter is the harmful algal blooms. Not all eutrophication is necessarily harmful, but there are many things that do cause a lot of grief to our industry in terms of they create a negative image of the role of nutrients in the environment. Red tides, microcystins, pfisteria, domoic acid, seafood poisoning, cholera, malaria, West Nile virus, even water disinfection byproducts might get much more closely related to what would be IFPRI's mandate, is the human intake of food and water. But in all of these issues, there is some solid science, and there are a lot of misperceptions at the same time. And so what we're trying to do is get out the information from, at least as far well as we can see, from as neutral a standpoint as possible. Unfortunately, we couldn't find any independent scientists to write this chapter, so my colleague Cliff Snyder and myself are actually trying to author this chapter. We will make points that certainly a lot of the harmful algal blooms that are out there are associated not with fertilizers, not even with human-caused or anthropogenic nutrients from sewage systems. They come from natural nutrient upwelling in the oceans. Some of them occur actually at low nutrient levels, but the causes vary, and the ones in the U.S. Atlantic, admittedly, are the most strongly related to anthropogenic sources. We're not going to use this chapter as an argument that the fertilizer industry doesn't need to do anything. We recognize that we are going to have to manage nutrients well, but we also want to make sure that we have accurate information out there. And just as an example, okay, one example is that the risk of larger amounts of nitrogen potentially increasing in the future malaria. That's been mentioned in numerous scientific publications, and there are some studies that support on a small scale. You can show that adding nitrogen into a small ecosystem, you can get more mosquitoes and you can get more of the Plasmodium organism prevalent. But if you look at the data for the World Health Organization, those countries that report their malaria rates, and you look at their fertilizer use rates, well, this is the relationship that turns out. I couldn't find this one published anywhere in the literature, so I put it together myself, essentially. It is on a log-log scale. It covers a wide range, and admittedly, most of these countries are African countries. But you see, if anything, there's a negative relationship between a country's use rate of agricultural nitrogen and the malaria rate. And this is something I think that needs to be considered when we talk about the future imminent crises and risks, and how much weight are we going to put on to something like malaria risk. Thank you. I'm very sorry for my tendency to go over time, but Just a couple chapters to cover yet. One is by Don Huber, and it relates to health risks associated with plant disease. And essentially the theme of the chapter is that well-nourished plants have a lot of means to which they can resist plant pathogens better, and that plant pathogens can often be a risk to human health. The classic one being ergot in cereals. And ergot is a nice example because it's one that we know there is a control. Low copper soils is where you get high rates of ergot, and you can control it with application of copper-containing fertilizers. Some of the other mycotoxins that are indeed food safety risks, like aflatoxins and the toxins from fusarium-related species, pink molds, etc., we don't really have clear evidence of a single nutrient controlling them, but we recognize that in plant disease, manganese is a very important nutrient. Plants requiring manganese often at 100-fold levels higher than are being required by a lot of microorganisms. And our final chapter addresses the human health issues between organically produced food and conventional crop production. And that's an area of continuing debate all the time. We have Holger Kirschman and Lars Bergström, both from Sweden, who have done some excellent scientific work trying to look at the scientific evidence that comes in comparing these kinds of systems. Where we're going with this, all of these human health related issues relate to the sustainability of agricultural production, sustainability of our industry. And so we put this in the context of what Luc has already mentioned as well, our nutrient stewardship approach. We've developed this, what we call the 4R approach, because what we would like to do is be able to communicate well to the public about what plant nutrition management is all about. And if we want to summarize it in a nutshell, it's applying the right source of nutrients at the right place, the right time, and at the right rate. And that we try and then relate to sustainability. Sustainability will have to balance off the food security aspects, the human nutrition aspects, and the environmental aspects as well. And that's what we hope this publication will support as well. So just to summarize, that managing plant nutrition does impact the health of humanity in many ways, and we don't understand them all. We hope to identify the knowledge gaps there. This thorough scientific review of the impacts of the fertilizer use on human health will benefit our industry by helping to find solutions that resolve the harmful while enhancing the beneficial. The relationship of fertilizer use to human health needs full consideration in sustainability initiatives. We recognize the efforts of organizations like Walmart, PepsiCo, in Canada, Loblaws. They're putting significant emphasis on assuring the public that what they are selling was produced using sustainable methods. And we are hoping to gear our 4R nutrient stewardship concept to fit into that as well. We welcome input from IFPRI in identifying priorities among the many opportunities and challenges that I've outlined today.